Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this opportunity to be together. Thank you for another day today that we were able to just live and breathe and serve you and connect with your people, God. And we thank you for this time as we have an opportunity to continue to do that tonight. Lord, I just pray that you would help us to just focus in and dial in on all that Tom's going to share with us tonight. Maybe for some of us, we've had a difficult day or a day that might threaten to sort of pull us away mentally. And Lord, if that's the case, I just pray that you would settle all of us in. And again, just help us to hear your voice tonight. I thank you for these wonderful leaders and their incredible organizations and the kingdom work that they're doing. And I just pray that you would continue to bless it in a special way and bless Tom as he shares with us. And we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Okay, thanks. Well, thank you everyone for coming. I appreciate it. It's glad to meet you. And I put together a list of some items that hopefully sharing with you will be helpful to your ministries. My purpose is to help as many kingdom building ministries as possible become best in class. And to do that, it really starts with leadership. Some of the things I'll cover probably are going to sound familiar, and they maybe are reminders, and some may be some new ideas. So hopefully there's a mixture of both, and you'll find that the time we are together, it'll be valuable to you. I broke this down into several parts, and because the more I serve on boards, and I've been on a lot of them, and I've chaired several, it's always hit me that the best boards are the ones that have a good relationship between the chair and the executive director or CEO, whichever title you're using. If they're not on the same page, working together, it's going to be a mess. Probably going to lose good board members. They're not going to want to waste their time, maybe even lose staff. So this is a sort of compilation of my experience, both good experience and maybe where I got my nose bloodied once or twice, and I learned from it. And hopefully you can learn from that without having to go through any stress. So let me start out with the role of the board chair for executive directors so they have a clear understanding. First of all, talk about following the established rules and laws and the bylaws. This is sometimes the governance chair, usually, but ultimately it's the board chair. That is an important role to make sure you're consistent, operating out of integrity, and following all the rules that you've got. Boards I've been on that have been successful have always worked with a sense of urgency. There's been a sense that we got to get this done. We got to work on our client. Who is our client? Who are we serving? And the boards that can recruit and retain high value directors are the ones that have well-paced meetings with a sense of urgency that gets things done. So I think that's where the board chair has to come in. I'm not talking about a board chair being an Attila the Hun kind of person, but someone who just keeps things moving and respects everybody's time. Another one is conducting straight talk. I've had to have straight talk discussions with some board members on the side a couple of times. One of them was a pastor even. So that one I really took a deep breath and said a prayer and chatted, and it went really well. He just wasn't showing up for board. This is when we lived back in Illinois, in Wheaton, Illinois. He wasn't showing up for meetings, and he was an important part of the community, plugged into the community we serve. Well, I finally pulled him aside. We chatted. Turned out he's got problems with his church and problems with his son, I think it was. So it was hard for him. So that just made it a lot easier for me to work with him, try and make things better. But you need to sometimes pull out those individuals and have the straight talk. Maybe it's someone who attacks other people rather than attacking the issues. They need to be pulled aside and chatted with. Or someone who is not following through on commitments that they make. Once, at some point they need to be pulled aside and asked, is this board still working for them or not? And why are we getting these commitments and not following through? Because everybody else is watching. And the few that are your hard workers are going to get burned out if you keep giving excuses to the people that aren't pulling their weight. And a short message early on usually can rectify the situation. And demonstrates the moral courage to always do and say the right thing. There's, transparency is important, and people's commitment to doing what's right and following your mission, vision, and values is important. So you want someone who's a stand-up kind of a person who will say what they think and
Hey, Tom. Tom, you have muted. You're muted. You just went mute on us.
oh, there you go.
There you go.
Okay.
There you go. So we didn't catch that last piece that you mentioned there.
Well, the last one was about demonstrating moral courage to always do and say the right thing. The leadership starts at the top with the board, but leadership of the board starts with the chair. So when questions of integrity come up, questions of right and wrong, the board chair really needs to come down on the right side of those things, no matter what the ramifications are. It's important to set the right tone, because then you can hold other people accountable. And as long as people are speaking truth, and they're doing it with a sense of grace, you can get through any kind of a problem. But it's where people start holding back and hiding or having meetings after the meetings in the hallway. That's where trouble starts. The second one is ensures the board only performs board work. Well, I was on one board that I found out one of the trustees would go to the landscapers who took care of the property, telling them how to do their job, trimming the bushes and what have you. That's not allowed. The board needs to worry about where the organization is going and sets the tone for the future. And if conversations need to be had, that goes through the chair, and the chair talks to the executive director, not directly. The board needs to stay out of operational situations. Now, if it's a new board or a small one, a new ministry, a small board, sometimes you're wearing a couple of hats. You're stuffing envelopes for the annual gala. You're picking the color of the napkins for the annual gala. That's where you're really wearing a volunteer hat more so than a board hat. But you want to stay out of the day-to-day. Let the executive director run the show and lead. Another thing that the chair does is he or she leads the board. Everyone respects a leader who has a confidence and a sense of where the ministry is going and asserts his or herself to keep everyone on track. Board members need to be reminded that they're carrying out Christ's work. Once in a while, I've started out a board meeting and asked people just to make sure we're grounded, because you can get so lost in financials and goals and whatever expenses. Just to ask them to take 10 minutes and say, if Jesus were sitting here at this table, would he be okay with what we're talking about? Would he be okay with our budget? Would he be okay with our goals? Are we in alignment with him? And just let the board talk for a few minutes about something like that. That's providing the spiritual leadership for the organization. Set the right tone for the board. I would run I'm known for running pretty tight ships. I let people speak anything that needs to be said, but if I start getting repetition around the table, I'll usually end it right there, because we're starting to waste people's time. I think that's very important. You want to have a well-paced meeting. You want to make sure the right items are on the agenda as a board, as a chair. To the extent you can stay out of the weeds, stay out of the details, you want to be looking. I read somewhere, and it makes sense to me. A board agenda ideally should be 60% about the future and only 30 to 40% about today. So you're looking at your numbers, you're looking at how you're doing on budget and how you're taking care of your clients. But you should be looking into the future. What's the scenario look like? Is the board and the ministry prepared for whatever is coming into the future? That's what the board chair needs to make sure is being discussed. So you got the right things being discussed by the right people in the room. And leading doesn't mean dictating. The other one's holding people accountable. You only need to do that once or twice, and everybody gets the message that if there's a commitment made, they're going to be expected to follow through on it. And then the meeting almost runs itself. Promotes healthy discussions at board and committee meetings to a culture of openness, trust, and truth. It's okay to have bad news, and I would always encourage it as early as possible, and let your committee chairs know if things aren't going well. Find out early in advance, because you can solve those problems much earlier than if you let them fester and get old. Letter D, ensures effective identification, selection, and orientation of candidates. Now, you may have a nominating committee or governance committee, but what happens is the board gets so comfortable with itself, they don't even think that someone's going to be stepping off down the line. What I encourage is set up a chart with all the names of your board members on the left-hand column, and then on the right-hand column, you have the years. Let's say your annual meeting is in January. So the next one will be January of 2024, 25, 26, 27. And then you put a checkbox by the year that each director has to step down. So you can know 2-3 years in advance that someone's got to step down. There may be another column to put a X if the person is able to be renewed for another term or not. So you look and you got your CPA and it's a key person and they've got 2 years left, but they're not eligible for another term because they've already served 2 terms. You know, you got to start recruiting another financial person, the CPA. It could be whatever skill set you're talking about. But the board chair should have a chart like that, so he or she can keep track of what skill sets are on the board, which ones are we going to lose pretty soon, because I got to be thinking about replacing them. And that's where the board chair and the executive director have to work together to make sure that you've got a constant flow of the skill sets that are needed. Another chart you might want to make that I do it with one board I'm on is we have all the names down the left side, and on the right side we've got columns of different skill sets. One is financial expertise, one is access to philanthropically minded people, one is governance expert, one knows programming that we do for our clients, and so on. You know, one is social media, one is communication, just an attorney. Take whatever skill sets you've got on the board and plot them out. And that way you can see if there's any that you don't have that you need to recruit somebody onto the board for, or if someone's going to be stepping off, you make sure you're recruiting to get them back on. The other thing I would say here has to do with orientation. Board members typically get very little, if any, orientation. The joke for churches is that the parking attendants get more training than the elders do when they join the church. And that's a shame, but it's a fact of life. Very few boards I've been on, when I've come on, had a training program. I've usually ended up trying to create it. So you want to make sure your new board people have a sense of what they're getting into before they sign up. And on my website, there's a document you can download. It's an orientation document. It's kind of generic, so you can change it to fit whatever your needs are. But the list of items to cover in an orientation. There's another one, an expectations document. That's something you can cover with a candidate before they sign on, before you accept them. So they understand what is expected of them as a board member, showing up to meetings, participating in committee work. Maybe they have to volunteer at an outing or two. Maybe there's a give or get. Maybe your ministry has a requirement. They've got to give X or get X. You're better off letting people know about that in advance, not after they're already on the board. So you can download those and use them as they might be helpful to you. Another thing the board chair has to do, this goes back to moral courage and integrity, is modeling the requirements of the duty of care, loyalty, and obedience. Those are the 3 duties that a board has, but it starts at the top, and the board chair needs to lead that way. Ensures effective planning. Now, planning can go a lot of different ways. I've been on boards where the board did it and then shared it with the leadership team, and they came up with the implementation plan after a little give and take. I've seen ones where the board delegated that to the CEO and his or her leadership team to come back with recommendations. And I've seen where it's a collaboration piece, which is my personal favorite. You've got the board and you've got the CEO and you've got maybe a couple of the key leaders, and they work that out together. So the point is to make sure there is one and everybody knows where you're headed. those kind of tools can be very helpful recruiting new board members or key hires. Everybody knows where you're going. They know how you're going to get there. You tie into your strategic plan, to your mission and vision. You tie it into your budget. You tie it into your hiring, your communication, what your website looks like. It's just a nice, tight package. Everything is in alignment. You know, there's never a day when ministries have too much money. And so to make sure you get the best use of the resources you've given, whether it's in-kind gifts or financial, you want to make sure everything is in tight alignment with your mission, vision, and values. And one way to do that is with the strategic plan. Make sure everything fits, everything is tight. The strategic plan, then, parts of it anyway, become part of your regular board meeting agenda. And you make sure everything is on track. You find out if the board finds out if the executive director is having problems with certain areas, maybe you can jump in and help out. Some people believe in one of those red, yellow, green light dashboards, they call them, or thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs even. That way, if something is thumbs up or thumbs even, the board maybe doesn't waste their time talking about it. But if something is thumbs down or the red light is flashing, that's where the board needs to maybe spend some time with the executive director. So you're not wasting time talking about all the good stuff and avoiding the things you really should be talking about. Another thing that the chair does is ensures financial stability. And that's partly through his or her role. It's also partly through the finance committee, your CPA, whoever you've got monitoring, your treasurer. That's making sure that the revenues are online, expenses are being managed, and that the revenue, if it's being invested somewhere, it's being invested wisely, and that the right priorities are getting funded, and priorities that aren't really, programs that aren't really delivering on their promise, those get defunded. If you can get a CPA or a financial person that not only reports on the numbers, but tells you what the numbers are saying, because my experience is most boards, when they go to talk about the financials, everybody puts their head down and hopes they don't get called on. And then the treasurer has to give a report on the numbers. And they talk about how many cheese sandwiches Jonathan ordered for his team meeting, or how much he paid for parking to go to the department downtown. You know, that's not a good use of your time. But a good financial person can give you a overview, look at trends. What's been happening over the last several months? What is he or she projecting? Which can point you towards top items that you need to pay attention to rather than any one particular month. Trending is so important. One problem I see with boards is a lot of times boards have business owners on them, or retired business owners, and they're used to getting the full income statement and balance sheet and statement of financial condition. Typical boards don't need all that. They need certain key metrics, and the board needs to decide what it wants to receive from the ministry to keep track, to make sure they're fulfilling their fiduciary role. But to get the whole 3-4 pages and see the phone bill, yeah, that was just like last month. And yes, we paid our health insurance bill, or we paid our work comp bill. That's something management has to take care of. The board needs to be looking big picture, 30,000 feet, and looking into the future. Chair engages effective meetings. I talked a little bit about this. One of the first meetings I was at, we were in Chicago, suburban Chicago. It was a Monday night, first board meeting. I'll never forget it. Second floor of this wonderful ministry. And it was cold, and everybody's looking out the window, and the snow is falling sideways. And the meeting's going to go till 9. We don't know if our cars are even going to start. I mean, that was so distracting. Fluorescent lights, the heat, it was just terrible. You want to make sure you've got good conditions to be comfortable for a meeting so you can focus on what needs to be focused on. Meetings should be strategic and forward-looking and focused on your main issue, your goals, your missions, your top priorities. Sometimes board meetings ought to take a few minutes and talk about training. If you've got a big ministry with several different programs, all your board members are not real conversant. So you might have a program director come up, or you might do it, and just explain how one of the programs is going. You know, how's the food pantry going? How are expenses going? How many people coming through? What are the people saying? Maybe it's a clothing closet. Maybe it's a job assistance program. You give the board a little bit of a flavor from one of these each time, and they feel pretty plugged in and have a better sense of what's going on where the rubber meets the road. I try to have efficient meetings, as I said, and I try to keep an upbeat pace. I try to keep things moving. I always will talk, if I'm the chair, with the executive director about what the topics are going to be covered, what he or she wants to make sure I cover, what feedback they're looking for, so that everybody gets served. Remember, board chairs get very little training for this, for their role. If there's a good board chair that they're succeeding, maybe they observed and picked up some good habits. But there's only so much written in public about board chairs as opposed to executive directors, how to lead a ministry. Leading a board is another subject. So that's it for the first section, essential roles of board chair. Heather, you want to take a couple of questions here?
Yeah, you've touched so many incredible topics right from the start. A couple of questions. First one really Jonathan posed, and it was something you said right at the beginning is about the agenda. So he's asking, what's the right way to put together an agenda? Does the ED and the chair do it? Does the chair do it? How would you address that?
Well, I think a good place to start is you've got to do a approval of the minutes from the prior meeting. There may be other committee reports that need to be reviewed and accepted, the treasurer's report, and then take a look at your strategic plan and point out some of the deliverables, the goals that are due this year. Mm-hmm. I also talk to executive directors every week or every other week. Just depends how often our board meetings are. So sometimes topics will get discussed in that meeting, and I'll make sure they get on the agenda. You might send a note out to other board members and say, as the chair, here's what we're going to cover. Is there something specific you want? I also keep a running list of open items, and I don't bring them up at every meeting because I want to give the executive director a chance to work on them. But that's the list that I want to make sure doesn't get lost. So I may put that on the agenda too.
Yeah, great. That's very helpful. And so what you also are saying is that you, as the board chair, are really the one setting it in collaboration with the executive director.
Yeah, it's a board meeting, so it's the agenda that I ultimately set. But I want it to be collaborative because I want the board to be value added. Not to, we can get all wrapped up in governance and oversight, and we're walking around with clipboards and our glasses below our nose here, making sure everything's getting done. Well, a board is supposed to be a value-added piece. And so and that helps keep everybody talking to each other. And, while there is oversight, we're trying to work together. We're not trying to catch somebody doing something wrong. So I like to chat and make sure we're talking. And, sometimes I say, no, we can't do that this month, but let's try next time.
Yeah, good. Amy asked a great question. You talked about recruitment of board members and orientation. Her question is, what's the best way to go about recruiting and orienting and onboarding of a great board chair?
Recruiting of the chair?
Yeah.
Okay.
Recruiting the right person to be your chair.
Sure. Well, I would say this. You could take the position that everybody you recruit onto the board is someone who you think could possibly become a board chair. Now that's a hard one, but I think whenever you're compiling your lists of board candidates, you should be thinking who could be a leader of the entity. Now let me talk back down a little bit on that. I also think executive directors and board chairs and the governance chair, if you have a separate nominating or governance committee, those folks should have a confidential list in the top drawer of their desk of potential candidates. And they may be candidates who are serving other boards and don't have time right now, but they're people that are interested in your ministry. You want to keep track of them. You want to send them a note once in a while, maybe have coffee with them once in a while. Just let them know that at some point you'd really like them to consider coming on your board. And that way, you can spread out the skill sets you're trying to recruit. But the board chair is someone that you really got to be thinking ahead. I'm doing it I did that last year on a board I'm chair of, and I fortunately got a guy who's going to be able to take over and do well. There's another board that I'm vice chair of. Then I've only got a year and a half left on that board, and I got some work to do for that to make sure I got somebody ready to take over. So you really need to be thinking about board chair, treasury secretary, all the time, because without that, it's going to defer to somebody's friend, and then they're not up to it, and then the ministry suffers.
Yes, absolutely. Appreciate that. And I was talking with Bob Andringa, who's another good friend of yours, and he was talking about in the boardroom, most people know who the influential people are in the room, who is a good leader, who's a good facilitator, and that those skills really are important in a good board chair to do that, which is why you probably continue to be asked to be a board chair on a regular basis.
Well,
a couple other.
I got the reputation, and you got the books out. So when people agree with me, they call me an expert. When they don't, they just disagree. But there's nothing wrong with asking your board members, who do you know that can serve, and then you check them out. That's an old-fashioned way. You draft somebody's buddy. Well, that's only the first step. For some ministries, that's all they do, and then they slap them on the board. What you do is you find out, who do we know that has a financial background? Who do we know that can help us with X, Y, or Z? And then you maybe ask them to serve on a committee. You have board committees. You can have a governance or a finance or a golf outing or something. Have them serve on a committee, get to know them, see how they play nice with other people. Some people are great for running a golf outing, but you don't want them on a board because they're not as collaborative as they need to be. Yet they're really good at taking charge of a golf outing. You follow me? It's a different makeup.
Yeah, absolutely. Good.
It's a year-round recruiting. You're not just doing it a couple months before your annual meeting.
Yeah, always looking for good people. Yeah, I love that. Sharon asked, it sounds like the ED is part of each board meeting. Is that a standard protocol to have the ED a part of each meeting?
Yes. Executive directors typically are not on the board. They're ex officio members. They're non-voting members. Some boards I'm on, we have an executive session after the meeting. And if there's others in the room, they're excused. And then we have it with the CEO. And then we have a private executive session without that person. One board I'm on, we have an executive session at the beginning before everything gets going, and then another one at the end. And the one at the end has the CEO, and then we talk privately as well.
Thank you.
Then let me just add, then as board chair, I will often call the CEO and give them a general sense of what was discussed. I don't want them to think we're, plotting behind their back or something, but I'll let them know on things that are happening, usually without naming names, or maybe the sense of the board's a little queasy. Your XYZ program leader seems a little shaky. You ought to be, so you're not spotting, dropping a big bomb on the CEO out of the blue, but you let them know the board's not comfortable, or the board loves this person and they think you made a great hire. So you can talk in generalities.
Yeah, so good communication, but yes, including the ED in part or all as a member of the board, but ex officio, meaning non-voting, which is really
But he's non-voting and they have to step out for part of the discussion.
At times. Yeah. Jill asked, and actually a number of people are saying, yes, please answer this question. What's the typical time frame for members, board members, and for chairs?
Well, the more popular ones that I've run into anyway are no more than 2-3-year terms. Then you have to take a year off and you might get invited back on. I've seen some that have 2-year terms. 2 years seems a little short for me because the first 6 months or more, you're just getting up to speed really on the issues and feeling conversant. I think 2-3 year terms makes a lot of sense. Then they step off for a year and maybe they're brought back on later on. The board chair, to me, 3 years max. It's if they've even got that much time left in their term of service. To change them every year is not healthy. And I prefer to see the vice chair then stepping up. So because the vice chair and chair are talking a lot. So when the baton is handed over, there's not too much of a loss. But I think 3 years and it's time. There's one I'm getting off in December. It's 3 years. They're doing well. I need to step aside and let somebody else come in because I don't want it to be about me. You know, the board needs to feel like they're invested in the ministry. And if it's Tom left, Tom right, Tom over the middle, it's like, well, what am I doing here? You know.
There's a point when it might be too long to do that.
Oh, yeah.
Very helpful.
Well, yeah, you also develop blind spots. You know, somebody needs to come, you know, they may not want to tell me that, Tom, what you put in is not working. But when I'm off the board or out of the chair, they can come in and fix it and make it better. And there's no hard feelings.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and a question just to clarify, is the ED or CEO ever a voting member of the board? Would you ever see that?
No, well, you shouldn't. You might in some cases, but it's a conflict of interest because the board is supposed to be that person's boss, really. The other thing is if the CEO votes for or against some issue, that could very well sway the rest of the directors, not because they agree with the decision, but because the CEO probably knows more than I do. And so I just better go along with him or her because they're more informed rather than them taking the time to deliberate and use their wisdom. So I think you're better off not having a voting piece. And I just think the trend is not to do that. It's not good.
So that's one of the questions, and I think we want to move on to the rest of your content, but just that clarifying for some of these organizations that are pretty new and start with an ED on the board and as voting, you know, when is it healthy and when do they shift? So they're thinking about that, but let's, you know, let you go on to the next sections. And you know, Tom will always take questions at the very end, and he's going to make himself available for those that want to have further conversations in more detail.
Sure. You know, Heather, where that comes in a lot, just to wrap up that conversation, is where you've got a founder that's the executive director, and their fingerprints are all over. They own all the relationships. They raise the money. They do everything. They want to be a voting part of the board. That's just, you have this founder syndrome issue, which can be a real problem, very frustrating. So anyway, you're better off not having them vote. Second part, essential role of the executive director. Leads, assists in developing the strategic plan. They have to play a key role in the strategic plan and implements it. The CEO is responsible for the execution and completion of the plan where things are running out of whack or out of alignment. The board goes to the CEO and talks about that at the board meetings. Serves as an ex officio member, is the official liaison between the board and the staff. That's pretty clear. I've covered that. And really has to provide leadership in all areas, in fundraising, in the management, with volunteers, outreach. That person is the face of the organization, usually. So they need to be somewhat articulate and engaging, and someone that when they walk in the room, they're there because they just have this it about them that bleeds the ministry. They advocate on behalf of the mission to donors, to chambers of commerce, community groups, funders, foundations. They have to insist on the highest ethical standards, accountability, and compliance with all the laws and all the rules. Again, it starts at the top. And then comes up with certain measures to improve the effectiveness of the programs. You want to make sure you're investing your dollars in programs that work. If you've got a job assistance program and you have a couple of features to it, which are the features that are best that you can feed more resources to, which are the ones that are not working. That's something that the board, the executive director has to look at. Where do I get most bang for our buck to help our clients? They keep his or her eye on the changing and critical needs of the people served. This board, first board I was on back in Wheaton, we had people that were like one step away from being without a home, missing meals, living in their car. They were at risk. Well, what they needed 15 years ago when I was on that board and what they need today is probably very different. And so you can't assume that your clients today need the same thing that you offered when you started the ministry. You need to take a look at their needs. There may be other ministries or other services available. So there's something maybe you don't need to offer anymore, but shuttle them over to somebody else. Or maybe somebody else has clients that could benefit from your program. So maybe there's some sharing that can happen. But you want to make sure that what you're providing is what they need and what benefits them today. Because today is very different than in the past, what their needs were. Then they recruit and hire the best people that they can find. A lot of management by walking around. It's, you know, the work you do is rewarding. It can be frustrating. You're usually working without a lot of extra revenue, a lot of resources. So you're doing the best you can. You're trying to compensate the people the best you can. Sometimes you need to just walk around and pat them on the back and let them know you care. Let them know that you understand what they're going through. Management walking around, very effective. And you also pick up things about what's going on in your ministry. You try to fairly compensate them, encouraging people, and discipline them as needed. So that's it on the second one. Anything you want to talk about for roles of the chief executive? You guys can probably.
Well, we don't have any questions yet, but feel free to type in any questions. And if somebody has a burning one that you want to unmute and ask, you can do that.
Okay, well, I'll just move on then.
All right.
Potential gray areas. I sat down with my computer and just started banging out, where have I seen friction in the past? And the idea is, here are potential friction points. So be aware of them when they come, because they're part of the normal course of business and your ministry. But if you recognize that other ministries have trouble with it, maybe you can do a workaround. First of all, who works for whom? Does the executive director work for the board? Does the executive director work for the chair? Especially with founders or executive directors that have been around a long time, sometimes they kind of have a lot of head and they want to go off and do things without touching base with the board. The board is ultimately the one with the fiduciary responsibility, and the executive director does work for the board. So it's important to have a good relationship, stay plugged in. You're better picking up the phone and touching base periodically, just so everybody knows where you're headed, and that the board is comfortable that the executive director is working on things that the board has authorized him or her to do. What are the expectations of one another? I tell you, I got called in Illinois. I had to get a striped shirt and a whistle twice. 2 board chairs, executive directors, both focused on their ministry. One was a great, actually I got a letter from her today. She started a ministry for teen mothers that decided to have their baby and raise it. And they're couch surfing, they're living in cars, they're living with friends out there, whatever. Anyway, she had a board chair that was very committed to the cause. And the 2 of them were like getting wrangles with each other because they didn't have clear understanding of who did what. So I had to put out a flip chart over a couple of hours, and we just plotted everything out and then figure out who would do what till they were comfortable with it. And you know, they were both like pulling at opposite ends of the rope, trying to go the same way. So what are the expectations? Who's going to do what? Who's the spokesperson? What have you? Where do the roles begin, end, and overlap? And that can change from ministry to ministry, who's responsible. How do they handle the executive director's evaluation and board evaluation? I think these evaluations, I know not every ministry does it. I know it doesn't happen. But I think it's healthy to have those conversations. Doesn't have to be a performance review. And there are a lot of them online, free. You can download them, create your own. If you know any HR people, they've got ones they can send you, you can use, and just make them a collaborative discussion. What's going well, what's not going well? How can the board help? You know, is it working for you? Is this working for us? What can we do better? And then for the board, there's different ways to do that. Sometimes the executive director gets a chance to assess the board. Sometimes the board assesses itself. And I've seen cases where the CEO or the executive director and the chair does an assessment of each individual board member. So it depends how detailed you want to get, how much time you've got. But I think it's a good idea. You can have a board assessing itself exercise. So no one's pointing fingers at Joe over there who's always running late or runs off at the mouth too much. It's how are we doing with our governance? How are we doing executing what we say we're going to do? How are we doing watching our goals? And so it's everybody owning what's going right or what's going wrong. And to do that, if you do it every other year, it's a good idea. But especially these days, people want to know how they're doing. They want to get affirmed, or they want to get informed that they're a little bit off track. How do they get back on track? Just a little conversation like that can help solve problems later on. Board succession planning, that can be a big one. Who gets to pick the board candidates going forward? I've been involved with one where it's like gunfight at the OK Corral, to be real honest with you. I understand the executive director wanting to get friends on there, people they know and trust and respect, and maybe can manipulate a little bit. And I know board chairs who say, we have a fiduciary duty here. We can't, this is not a feel-good club. We have work to do, we have oversight. I would say the two groups need to be working together. The CEO needs to be working with the governance chair or whoever is compiling the list of candidates. Try to agree on the skill sets that are needed first, and then start coming up with some names. And you know, you never want to force a director on an executive director. That's just not healthy. You try and have interviews, have some chats, but this is definitely a point where it can be a flashpoint between the two. It's a delicate balance, oversight and value added. Who does what for strategic planning? Financial management. I've had one CEO who felt once the budget was approved, as long as he stayed within the bottom line, whatever, everything other, he was fine. And he would move money around and whatever, and the board would go nuts. And so those meetings were not particularly friendly. If he wanted to change money, move it out of category A into B, the board should know about it, because they made a decision based on a strategic plan to put X dollars in each of these little subgroups. So financial management and oversight means, do we put the right money in the right places? Do we place the right bets, as it were? Or is something just not working, or something changed externally, and so that money can be freed up to be used elsewhere? Got to work together on those things. Budget allocations, the board's role in fundraising, that's another big one. Board members recruited on don't typically know that part of their job is fundraising. I read a stat, it was like a year or two ago, that said only 30-some% of boards actually have a give or get requirement. I thought it'd be higher, but it wasn't. But if you do have a give or get, or even if it's just we expect to be in the top 3 of your favorite support missions that you support, that's out in front, so that the board candidate knows that they're expected to support, to what extent, if that's required. Maybe you're looking for them to help host some of their friends at your home, or every year you have influential people invited to some golf course for an evening, a reception, and a story of what's going on with the ministry, and ask them to be supportive, whatever that role might be with fundraising. I did a blog article a while ago on a stepladder approach. Some people love to talk to their friends, love to ask for money. Others are fearful. So I have some suggestions, like starting out with just writing thank you notes. Don't call, don't talk to anybody, right? Then call, you graduate to making a phone call. Well, usually that's just leaving a voicemail message. And then maybe accommodating the development director or executive director to a community group, the Lions Club or Women's Club or whatever. And just being there, seeing how it works. Slowly but surely, they get trained up in how to do that. Before you know it, you're unleashing the hounds, and they're doing a great job fundraising because they feel equipped. They're afraid until they get trained and learn how to do it. Program evaluation, what's working, what's not working. There's a place where data needs to come in. You know, data can be your friend and help you, point you in the right direction. Program effectiveness is important also because as you're talking to foundations, filling out grants, talking to potential major donors, you know, these days, those people want to make investments and they want to know what the return is going to be. So if you've got an idea of something, a lot of people are not going to want to invest in it because it's untried. But if you've got a program that's working and it's proven and you can show data to show that you can move people from point A to point B, somebody's more inclined to support you there. So the more you can have that kind of a data measuring metrics, measuring effectiveness would be helpful. What is success for the agency? Is it just meeting your goals? Is there something else? What does success look like? That can just help channel conversation down the same pathway. So you're talking about the same thing and not talking crosswise to each other. How about the gray areas? Any questions someone wants to bring up?
Hey, Tom, I'll just jump in for a second. I think a number of things that you just explained right there are completely connected with making sure that you're doing a good orientation, like you said earlier, for your board, right?
Yes.
So a lot of the reasons why people get confused on roles and responsibilities, and they don't know that they're supposed to be givers and they're supposed to help in fundraising, is they haven't been oriented that way, right? And so like you said, when we get boards that people are just putting their friends and relatives on it, and there aren't really expectations of deliverables, that can really create a lot of problems. And I always say it like this, and everybody always laughs at me. Nobody wants to go down in history as the worst board member you've ever had. And so what I mean by that is they want to be great. They want to deliver everything that they're supposed to deliver. But that means they have to be told the expectations. They have to be led well, and they have to be taught well, especially in areas of fundraising. So I think it all starts with orientation. So I think there's a big connection point there.
Yeah, it's a great observation. Again, my website's got a tool you can download and make it your own, change it around. One thing you might want to try is create a mentor-mentee for new board members. Assign a mentor to a new board member so that they can confidentially talk to the mentor, the experienced one, get a sense of the lay of the land. Because new board members typically are reluctant to voice too much early on, especially if you've got some strong-willed people on the board who are not afraid to shout someone down or tell them, well, we tried that didn't work, or you know what I mean. But if they've got a safe place to go, have a cup of coffee and say, tell me how this really works, or how do I, whatever it is, that will bring them up to speed quicker because they've only got so long on the board. The clock is ticking. And if they lose the first 6 or 9 months just trying to learn things, you've lost a lot of time from what would have been a valuable new person. Anything else?
No direct questions. I think we do have a number of people on the call that are founders, and there is a little curiosity. If you have time and you can decide, you can either touch this now or wait till the end. They'd love to hear a little bit more about the founder syndrome that you brought up and some things, to consider, look for tips of how to navigate that, to be able to help founders move in the right time out of that position. So up to you if you want to touch that now, or if you want to touch it at the end after you get the next section.
Well, we can talk about it for a minute now because I brought it up. I've been on a couple boards with founders and I've had mixed results with it. The founder is someone who has the relationships, the connections, and some founders recognize that they can't take the ministry from A to B without bringing other people around, and they're very collaborative, and they involve other people, and they're great. And then when it's time to step aside, they turn it over and they back away. They finish well. Some don't. They don't want to let go. I was on one in California. It was so frustrating. He wasn't able to keep good board members because he did what he wanted to do no matter what the board had said. And that's not a way to encourage loyalty. There is a book out, and I got to think of the name of it. Or look here. Anyway, it's about working on your ministry, not in your ministry. So what, and it's a very big difference. If you're a carpenter and you're working on the wood and nailing and whatever, that's what you're doing. But if you want to build a carpentry business, you got to step back and work on the business. You know, who are the clients? Who am I connecting with? Who am I marketing to? Who, what's the revenue projections look like? The name is escaping me now. It's making me nuts because I've used it as an example. But if you just think of the concept, working in the business, in the ministry versus on it, and founders, some have a good job of working on it also. That's important. That's an important piece.
Yeah,
And
that's helpful.
You can even Google founder syndrome. You'll find all kinds of stuff on there. Good stories, horror stories.
Very helpful because most founders who started really did start in working in the ministry.
Right, and they had to. Yeah.
And they're passionate. That's it.
It's called
That's
the E-Myth.
That's how it started.
The book is called the E-Myth. E-Myth Revisited, I think it is. Entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Where you're an entrepreneur, but someone's got to clean the dishes, someone's got to sweep up, someone's got to order the copy paper, you know, whatever.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. You can move on to your final section.
Okay, some proven ways to build and maintain a successful working relationship. Just some ideas. The chair and executive director got to be shoulder to shoulder, and everybody needs to be collaborative, focused on what's best for the ministry, what's best for the clients. They don't compete. If there's a sense of competing between each other, they need to go into a corner and work that out, because the board's going to sense it, the staff is going to sense it, and everybody's going to pull back and just wait until that dust up occurs. As I say here, they have different and separate but complementary roles. The chair is a disciplinarian for directors, not the executive director. Sometimes chairs ask the executive director to call up a board member and tell them they're not showing up, or tell them they're, you know, whatever, they're falling short. That's the board chair's role. Don't put your executive director in that position. They have ongoing, regularly scheduled communications to set clear expectations of each other, build trust, and clear the air. I can't recommend this enough. It's so healthy, because sometimes there's just misunderstandings that don't get spoken unless time is carved out to cover them. They help each other understand what unforeseen issues may be going on. One board I was on, the financials were coming out late. There was a little bit of errors, and this lady had been just perfect all the time. Well, I talked to the CEO, found out that she's bookkeeper, accounting manager, really. Her mother was sick in another state, and she was distraught and was trying to work from, I think it was South Carolina. So that helped me run cover for everybody with the board. Here's what's going on. Here's the problem. And the board understood, and they were fine with it, and they knew we'd get back. And now she's back cranking out accurate reports on time. There was one other one where a staff member was having an issue. I forget what it was, but when the CEO told me, I was able to work with the board so that this person didn't seem like someone that was being difficult and obstructive. So you want to keep talking. They keep them a running list of important and pending issues. I mentioned that earlier, just that list of things that are going on. They agree to build a relationship based on no surprises. Boy, that is so important. No surprises, no hidden agendas, focused on what's best for the ministry. They both have the moral courage to say with grace what needs to be said. If something hurts your feelings, if something didn't sound right, drill down on that, find out in an inquisitive way. That can help keep people talking to each other, keep people focused on the ministry. The chair helps the executive director understand what the board is most concerned about. That typically happens in the executive session. I find out what the board really thinks, and then I give a sort of a varnished version or softer version to the executive director if that's called for. Try and set meeting dates for all board and committee meetings in advance. Have effective committees. That's not really typically a part of this presentation, but a board chair needs to make sure that the committees are doing its work. I'm a great believer in committees doing a lot of the heavy lifting and coming back with recommendations. That board I was on in Wheaton, 17 board members, winter again, okay, snow coming sideways, cars maybe not going to start. We had a spreadsheet, 17 of us had spreadsheets of like 6 different proposals for health insurance plan. Now, what's more boring than 9 o'clock at night looking at spreadsheets like Ledger? And here's the thing, I'm the only insurance guy on the board, and health insurance was not my area. I was involved with professional liability insurance. So you want to send that to the committee, let them drill down, come back with a recommendation or two, or come back with questions, because that took up a lot of time for 17 people, most of whom were totally disengaged. It's just not the way to run a railroad. And then the more effective your committees are, the more spanking your board meetings are going to be. You get things done and you move on. And you're not bringing up topics every month. The board hates to have things keep coming up. They think they made a decision and the chair keeps bringing some topic back. Once the decision is made, you move on. Discuss each meeting's agenda items and handouts. Ensure adequate staffing for the board. Mutual accountability. I mean, you can read these. This is like, trustworthy, loyal, helpful, like the Boy Scouts. But this is this magic sauce that makes for a good relationship. It's like dealing with your spouse. If I got a problem, or if I miss a couple of quiet times in the morning, my wife knows about it. I mean, if I miss 3 days, everybody knows about it. So you're better off not missing it, but bringing that stuff up, getting it resolved early on. So any questions on this part?
Yeah, Tom, will you say a little bit more about the adequate staffing? One of the earlier questions really was about the right size of the board, knowing that in this group, we do have quite a few people that are brand new. So they're just starting off. And then we have some that have been developed for quite a while. So how would you, answer that in terms of what is adequate staffing and what's the right number to accomplish the things that need to be accomplished on a board?
Sure, it's a great question. I get asked it a lot. There is no magic number. There's probably a legal minimum. A lot of states require 2 or 3 or whatever. Some boards have 20 and 30. Usually universities and hospitals, whatever. The answer, though, is the board needs to be whatever size is necessary to conduct the board's business and conducting oversight. So if you've got a finance committee, if you've got an audit, if you've got maybe a marketing committee or development committee, I'm on the board of Arizona Christian, we've got an academic committee. That's a board you wouldn't have, a committee you wouldn't have elsewhere. So you need enough people to get the work of the board done, because you can't have people sitting on 2, 3, 4 committees and chairing another one. It just doesn't work. Now the trend has been smaller boards because big ones can get unwieldy. But if you've got a 9-person board, you better get at least 5 to show up. Otherwise you can't conduct any business. So, 11, 12 is a nice number for the bigger ones, but the smaller ones may have only 5 or 7, that's just sort of the nature. But the thing is, you've got a fiduciary duty and then a value added responsibility. So how small can you keep it without burning out trustee or directors and still get your work done?
Great question.
And so I would say in your bylaws, excuse me, in your bylaws, I would not put a limit, a maximum number. I'm sure Bob Brown would tell you. You might have a minimum, no less than 5, no less than 7. And you could have up to 20 or 15 or whatever number you, or you can shift it around based on what's going on if you need some special expertise.
Yeah, good. And following up to that, one question was, what happens if on your board, you've got board members, but they aren't willing to volunteer and commit to be part of a committee?
Well, then they probably shouldn't be on the board in the first place. And they need to know up front that that's part of the responsibility. And then when their term is up, assuming you don't vote them off the board for some other reason, when their term is up, they just don't get renewed. And you said, we love you, you're helpful, but we need to spread the committee work around, and we can't have somebody not on any committee.
Yeah, which goes back to what Jonathan was talking about, that orientation, setting up expectations, and communicating that even before in the recruitment process, that here's what we expect that every board member not only would be giving, but also would be serving on a committee and serving in different capacities as volunteers.
You know what I saw on one board back in Illinois, it's the only one I saw. They said that if special circumstances arise where the board member is no longer able to carry out the normal responsibilities, we will suspend their term. So let's say you've got an illness in the family, or a teenage son or daughter that's causing heartburn, and you really got to focus on that. And if you're 2 years into a 3-year term, maybe you cause a timeout, let the person take care of it and say, we will give you that 1 year, but maybe you need 6 months to fix this, fix this issue that's going on. So that might be one option. But when they're coming on the board, they should know we're expecting you to show up at, say, 75% of the board meetings. We're going to expect you to be on one committee anyway and participate in that. There's one consultant in Illinois, and I don't agree with this, but it's a little bit too detailed for me. They sit down with the executive director, and the board chair sits down with a chart that this consultant came up with, and they plot out everything that each director is going to do during the year. How many tables he or she's going to buy for the gala, which events they're going to fundraise for or volunteer for. They agree to show up for X number of meetings. You can get real detail like that, but people are busy. I just don't think that's realistic. But you just need to be clear what the expectations are, and then enforce them.
Yeah. Well, I know we're running close to the time. Jill had a question, and Jill, I don't know if you would be willing to unmute and to just pose a little bit of the context. You made the comment of it's hard to get good board members, and maybe you can give a little bit of that context that you're sharing, and then ask your question about engagement. Are you willing to do that? Would that be okay, Jill?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, it is good. It is hard to get good board members and good members to stick.
Right.
So I'm just wondering, I know you talk about your committees. Again, that is hard. But how do you really go about really, interviewing those board members and making sure that they're tied to your commitment, making sure they're tied to your, your overall, strategy, your overall goals, and how do you really interview them to make sure they fit? It's hard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Jonathan, could we maybe take down the slide and just have Hollywood Squares here? There we go.
There we go.
Look at
Thank
this wonderful people.
Well, I think volunteers are one potential source of board member, but I think you have to be careful about that because good volunteers don't necessarily make good board members. Just as Major donors don't necessarily make good board members. It's talking maybe to your former board members, talking to your current ones, and just reinforcing the mission and where we're headed. Who do you know that has an inkling towards what we do, or has a heart for the kind of ministry we're running? I think that's why I say it's a 12-month out of the year deal. You might talk to some other executive directors in the community. Who do they know that's stepping off their board, or who do they know that might be a good fit for your board? It's really, you're really looking for these people all the time. There's no, but if they're not interested in the ministry per se and just trying to fill out a resume, you don't want them. And you're better off having an open chair or two if you can afford it, because some star is going to come along the way, and if you're maxed out, you don't have a place for that person. So you always want to keep one spot in your hip pocket. But I think it's just talking to people, talking to board members, talking to donors, and then be specific. We're looking for a board member who can give X amount of time, show up at X meetings, and has skill set in either social media or finance. Because if you just tell a friend, well, I'm looking for board members, well, that's like, well, let me go ask Joe next door kind of a thing. You want to be real specific and lasered in on what you want, so that's who people will be thinking about. Because then after your conversation, they'll say, all right, Jill needs a social media expert. Maybe I got a niece, or maybe I've got a neighbor, but it doesn't come to mind right when you're talking. That's.
Well, and I
Yeah,
would
no,
say,
I hear you. Thank you. Thank you.
well, and I would say it all fits together, right? It's as Tom talked about, people who are passionate about your work, but also gifted that they can do the work of the board. And then I think, right, you put together a good orientation connected with that. People understand expectations. You help people be successful on the board. And when you start to get all of that working together, I think that's when you see, more longevity and people being fulfilled in their role as a board member. And so, Jill, really happy to continue the conversation about this with you. So please reach out, because this is a really important question, and we've got some other things we can share about that as well. But my experience tells me, and Tom, you tell me if you agree with me, when the board breaks down, it seems to be because we don't have the right people who know how to get the work of the board done. So that frustrates them quite a bit. They don't feel like they're being maybe led well. You mix in maybe not orientating them well, right? And detailing out expectations and deliverables. Right? That's sort of a conglomerate of frustration, I think, for board members. And I know for me, if someone asks me to be on a board, my first instinct and desire is to want to understand what the deliverables are, so I know if I can serve the organization well. And so a lot of times we just miss that aspect of it. And like Tom said, we're just bringing on, and listen to me, listen here, even really great Christian people, right? But they just don't know how to do the work of the board. And so it's gotta all fit together. Tom, is that what you've seen?
Yeah, exactly. There are people who want to serve, but they need to get trained, and some that don't know how to approach it. Jill, another suggestion I would make is talk to your CPA, for your accountant who does your books. If you have an attorney, talk to Bob Brown. Call up Bob Brown. He knows everybody in town. Say, Bob, we're looking for some board members who do XYZ, who love our ministry. Can you keep your eye out for somebody that'd be a good fit for us? We just, we want to go from point A to point B. And so we need people that can help us raise money, help us give our story, be specific of what you're looking for. But there are financial planners who work with nonprofits, investment people that work with nonprofits, attorneys, accountants, whoever. Some people call it Jonathan. I get calls once in a while. We're looking for somebody for a ministry.
Well,
Sometimes they're looking for me, but I told them I'm on too many right now. But I talk to people, so you never know, you know.
Yeah, well, and also the other thing I would add there is, some people are great and skilled, but they still might not be the right people for the work of the board, and that's understandable as well. And so, can you tie them in, maybe connected with some different committees, or can they serve the organization as a volunteer in a different capacity?
Mhm.
Right. So it all has to be working together. And again, boy, I feel like this is a topic we could we could stay on till midnight about, but because Jill, it is a great question and it's challenging and it's something that we're all trying to figure out.
I'm guessing one or two of these points might have struck home with you, or maybe more, whatever. But area number 5 here is what should you have a conversation with some of your friends about? What is there that you need to talk to the executive director or talk to your chair? What 1 or 2 things you can do that you think will add value and make a leap in improvement in effectiveness of your board, and then take this whole thing and sit down with if your executive director, with your chair, vice versa, and trying to rate yourself. How are we doing on these from a 1 to a 5?
Mhm.
And see what you think. My phone number is on the document, I believe, the first page, as is my email address. So we can answer questions now, and if you think of something tomorrow, or you just don't want to bring it up, you know, in front of everybody, drop me a note or give me a call. I'll be happy to talk tomorrow, because sometimes these generate thoughts as you're laying in bed thinking about it.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll send out this slide to you as well. Tom's got some additional information on the strategic partnerships page at venture19.org. You can see his website there. And Tom's got a couple great books out as well. And you can grab those at Amazon. So let me just say a quick prayer for us, and then we'll again hang on for a few more minutes for those of you that want to stick around. Lord, thank you so much for just this time together. God, I thank you for just Tom's expertise and his heart for ministries and serving the kingdom of God. And Lord, so much information tonight. And like Tom said, I just pray that you would just push a few things to the top for us. What do you want to stand out to us tonight, Lord? And help us to identify those couple areas. And Lord, lead us and guide us to take a few of the right steps moving forward with what you've said to each of us tonight. Thank you again for Tom and this time and these leaders. And we just pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.